Firstly, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to come down here and talk about my work with Beyond Blue. I, in one sense, feel fairly connected with your school because I'm young enough to remember when all the debates were taking place about whether the school was going to be formed, which led to its establishment in 1961. And at that stage, as a young boy, I used to live down here in Mount Eliza and actually went over the road to Mount Eliza Primary School. So there's a great connect, and as I drove down here today, I drove around the area to look at the old haunts where I used to live and play. And I'll tell you how young I am. I remember the Mount Eliza village when it only had one petrol station and one general store and nothing else. And now it's a thriving little community. So I've seen great change down here over the last 2 or 3 years. A long life's journey. In 1997, so I was still then Premier of the State, my daughter was at school, or had been at school at Geelong College, your old alma mater, and was a student at Deakin University. And she drove up from Geelong one night in tears, so she would have been 19 or 20, and came in to see me at home in Surrey Hills. And she said she just lost 2 male friends, not boyfriends, just part of her group, in totally unrelated car accidents that week. 2, unrelated. And she came to me and said, "Dad, what can you do to stop these young boys dying on the roads?" And I think she and I both took that at that stage as being a challenge to try and lower the road toll. But because I had a bit of influence then, I got the details of these 2 deaths from the police very quickly indeed, and found out that both of these young men had actually been left by their girlfriends. One was engaged because the girls, well educated, had decided to pursue careers in Melbourne that were not available in the Western District, as was their right. But these young men couldn't handle that separation, the breakage of a potential marriage and the end of a relationship. And both of them were emotionally depressed, not clinically, but emotionally depressed. They had a few drinks and then they used their motor vehicle to end their lives. So they were suicides. So that meant that we weren't talking about reducing the road toll, we were actually trying to understand what caused suicide. And I got a lot of advisors from around Australia into my offices, and we talked about it and realised we couldn't do much, because really if you want to reduce the toll, you've got to be with someone 24/7. So what causes life suicide? 75% of all suicides are caused by what we call either emotional depression, which the 2 young men that my daughter had a relationship with were suffering, and clinical depression. What is the difference? Emotional depression is where something happens in your life and you can get over it fairly quickly. So a relationship breakdown can often be emotionally depressing. Your football team loses, it could be emotionally depressing. If you don't get the scores you want in your exams, if you don't make the football or netball team, if a member of your family dies, you're going to be naturally very upset. But that emotional depression normally heals itself fairly quickly. Clinical depression is where you have things happening to you for weeks on end. And there might be 3 or 4 things that come together. I always say there's 14 ingredients within a depressive illness. So what might some of them be? Your eating habits might change. You might eat more or you might stop eating. You might have difficulty sleeping at night. You might find yourself withdrawing from your colleagues, from your schoolmates. You might find yourself not wanting to get up in the morning. You might feel continually stressed. You might actually have, if you're seriously enough ill, having suicidal thoughts. Now, if you go onto our website, www.beyondblue.org.au, you'll see the symptoms listed there. And if you have 3 or 4 of them over about a 4-week period, you're suffering early depression. Mild form, by all means. My advice to you then would be to find out quickly, or talk to your parents in order to get to a doctor, because early depressive illnesses can be cured very, very quickly. Sometimes it's trying to understand what it is that's causing you most pain in your mind. On other occasions, it might be a change of eating habits, it might be more exercise or less exercise. So it's nothing wrong with having depressive illnesses, as long as you understand they're like any other illness, but you just can't see them, and you get them treated as quickly as possible. You will find at this stage of your life, and there'll be many in the room in this hall who have felt stress and anxiety, which has continued over 2 or 3 weeks. At this stage of your life, in the main, you'll feel very comfortable with where you are. Yes, you'll have the normal things that go on with young people as you go through adolescence and into adulthood, but you'll feel fairly empowered that you can take on the world. The reality is we're all different, and things will happen that will change your processes. It's when those changes occur that you should be prepared to reach out. So when I heard a moment ago that the school is establishing a well-being committee, I can't tell you how much I endorse that and how important it is. Because the most important thing in your life is going to be the quality of your own health. And as you get older and as you take on other responsibilities, whether it's family or at work, you can't discharge your responsibilities as well to family, to friends, your work colleagues, schoolmates, unless you are mentally and physically well. So Mr Ford's one of your 2 deputy principals. If he is not well, mentally and physically, his ability to discharge his responsibilities will be some degree less than 100%. And depending on the scope of the illness, it might get to the stage where he withdraws from work altogether. So if you'd asked me 10 years ago what was the most important thing in my life, I would have said my wife and my children. Now I say it's my own health. And I don't say that egotistically, I say it because I know that if I want to look after them as well as I want to, if I want to run my businesses as well as I want to and run Beyond Blue, then I've got to be in the best condition possible. Now that is a condition that cannot be dictated to you by anyone else. It's not something that governments are responsible for. At this early age of your lives, understand that the quality of your life is going to be determined very much by the quality of your health, your wellness. So this new initiative that the school's undertaking should get you all involved in understanding from a relatively young age that this is one aspect of your life that you can control, and importantly, one aspect that you can take right through your life. So first point today, please, your own well-being. Secondly, if you take on that responsibility, if you develop this wellness concept here at Peninsula, you then have got to ask yourself, do we exist in a mentally healthy workplace? And you've just heard Mr Patterson talk about surveys that have been taken. One of the reasons we take surveys is to understand how people feel about their environment, about where they work. Do you look forward to coming to school? Do you enjoy your time here? If you have a workplace which is not healthy, mentally and physically, not only does it have social consequences, but it also has what we call productivity consequences. So in a business, you will find that the productivity, the commercial output of that environment is reduced. To give you an example, mental illnesses in the Australian workforce cost the Australian workforce every year $10.9 billion. So if every workplace was mentally healthy, there would be that much more productivity. Now some of you will have heard about workers' compensation and what an awful thing it's meant to be. But workers' compensation isn't the largest component of that $10.9 billion of lost effort, of lost productivity. And it's not even absenteeism, that is people who've withdrawn from the workplace or withdrawn from school. It's actually presenteeism. coming in at about 6.5 billion. What is presenteeism? What I said a moment ago about Mr Ford, coming to work and not being productive because he's not mentally well, because there are stresses and anxieties happening in his life that he produces lower than he could normally do. So one of the tests for this school will be, not only among students, but among staff, will be eventually to have a proper examination of whether this is a mentally healthy school. And if it is, I'm sure that you will all enjoy coming here more, and the outputs of what you contribute, be it in music, or be it academically, or be it in sport, will be so much better. There is one other aspect of that that becomes terribly important. If you commit to well-being, if you get to understand the ingredients of depression or stress or anxiety, you will then be looking out for each other. You'll be able to have conversations. Now, it is a truism that girls speak more among themselves about things that cause them stress and anxiety. And what do we men think? That we're born to be tougher than John Wayne, and it's a weakness if we talk about a relationship issue, or if we talk about a health issue, or maybe later on in life a financial issue. But again, if you see something, if you know enough about the issues, you might recognise in one of your fellow schoolmates that they're not as they would normally be. And so to go up to them and ask them, are you okay, might actually lead to a situation through a conversation where you can help them deal with the stresses that they're facing. Let me just give you an example that is terribly relevant today. Some of you will have seen, and some of you might be associated with the land. Though half of our dairy industry has just received from two of our major processors information or a change in the price that is being paid at the farm gate for the milk that they produce. And not only have the processors reduced the price, because they say the farmers have been overpaid for the last 9 months, they're backdating that to July the 1st last year in what we call retrospective administration. Wearing my hat as chairman of Beyond Blue, where I have dealt with farmers around the country in times of drought, in times of fire, in times of flood, in times of excessive isolation, I know right now there will be farmers who simply can't address the problems that they're facing. They will be under so much stress, so much anxiety. It is probable that some of those farmers will take their lives, as they've done in the past. So getting governments, and the Victorian government today has said they'll put in a package to support these people, while they might support them financially, what is most important right now is to support them mentally. How to help them deal with the new situation that they face. In the same way here at a school, any one of you at any time could find yourself confronted with a change of circumstances. And depressive illnesses don't happen just because of an event. I, touch wood, have never suffered from clinical depression. But I know enough about the illness now to know that I could go to bed tonight, I could wake up tomorrow in the fetal position, terribly, terribly ill. And you would think, and some would say, Kennett's just acting, or he's being soft, when in fact I might be very, very ill indeed. Which is why I come back to this concept of you thinking about the illness, learning about it through our website or through this program we're putting here at the school. Now let me just mention one other factor, if I may, because it's very relevant right now. The Australian Bureau of Statistics released a couple of weeks ago the suicide rate for 2014. They're always a few years behind, and even now there are some deaths that are still being examined to determine whether they were a road accident or in fact they were suicide. the figure that came down was 2,864 deaths by our own hand in 2014. Now, to put that into perspective, that is 8 Australians a day. So just imagine there's about 8 of you here in each of those rows. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the gentleman there with the dark hair and cloud, put your hand up. Yep, higher, both of you. Righto, so you can all see wherever you're sitting, these two guys, everyone in front of them represents one Australian who in 7 days have left us. Imagine the MCG, full on grand final day, 100,000 people, Hawthorn again competing for another flag. 73,000 of that 100,000 represents the number of people who attempt to take their lives every year. So for every suicide, 30 attempt to take their lives. Now this is the world in which you live. This is the world in which we describe as Australia as the lucky country. But there are a lot of people dealing with issues that they cannot deal with and exit for one reason or another. But most of those people have no reason to exit. They are emotionally depressed. Something's happened in their life which has upset them. It's why, for instance, the suicide rate among young girls is growing. Why? Because increasingly we use these new devices and we take phones and everything else into our bedrooms at night, and in the darkness of our bedroom we exchange messages, etc. And sometimes, deliberately or unintentionally, we can send a message that is received by a friend, our colleague, or the person we're trying to hate or hurt in the most unfortunate way. How do you deal with technology, which is increasingly rapid in terms of communication? The best thing is to use it wisely and always leave it on the kitchen bench before you go to bed at night. Why? Because your body needs to have a good night's sleep. That's why I say you should be physically active and mentally active every day so that you sleep well. It's why I say to so many people of my generation and older, never retire. If you retire, your focus narrows. You're not physically active, you're not mentally active, and therefore you toss and turn at night. So well-being, the things that you can do to manage your life, the things that you can do to enjoy life more, the things that you can do for each other, is very much dependent on what you're prepared to contribute. So in coming down here this morning, or this afternoon, I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts, please. Your own health is by far the most important thing in your life going forward. You control it, you know what's right, you know what's wrong, you'll be tempted many, many times, and I don't mind you being tempted once or twice in moderation. But understand the risks you take, not only to your own health, but also to the health of others, if you do whatever it takes to a degree that causes pain and hurt. Secondly, I want you to understand that this society of ours is going through a lot of change right now, and the speed of communications is going to increase rapidly. Sadly, as we're seeing, the opportunities for many are not there, as we've noted in the past, which is why good education, and not just academic education, but good communication skills is terribly important. In some of our country towns now, there are 30% of young people unemployed. In Geelong and Wyndham, there's 14 to 20% of young people unemployed. It is terribly important where you can to use your education based on hopefully good individual values that come from family and school, etc., to make sure that you carve out whatever it is in life that keeps you occupied. I don't mind unemployment per se, as long as the individual is otherwise occupied. And it's through boredom and not being occupied that we're now finding many young people are unfortunately being tempted by particularly ice. I'm going up to Shepparton in 2 days' time. The biggest scourge in Shepparton right now is ice among young people. And the damage it is doing to individuals and families is horrendous. So, please, I think what I'll do is finish up, throw it open to questions, answers and abuse. As you go away from here today, please just remember, we're only here once. Whether you live to 20 or 100 makes no difference in real terms. In the scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket. What is important is how you live your life. And your life will be lived better if you are well, if you are healthy. We never know when we're going to be struck down, permanently or with some form of illness. We can do our best to prevent it. And by that I mean not only physical injury and wellness, but also mental. So, let's throw it open to questions and answers. Who's first? Yes, lady up the back.
And everyone turns around and stares. Because someone wants to question.
Yeah.
In regarding to talking to people about mental health, how would you address to someone who you know or suspect has mental health issues or problems? And how would you make sure that they are okay or just not going through any bad times? And how would you make sure that?
It's a very good question because I get asked that a lot. And it often just starts with a conversation. Just sitting down, having a talk with them, getting their confidence about issues, and then maybe just saying, look, we've been mates for a long time, I know you're behaving differently, is there something on your mind I can help you with? So you don't have to go in and say, oh gosh, look as though you've got a mental illness. You'll probably get rejected fairly quickly. But just to have the conversation. I'll give you another example if I may. Last year I came across a young lady, single mum, 2 children, and she came up and spoke to me in the street, and she said, you know, I'm so depressed. She said, I have to get up in the morning, get the children up, get them dressed, get them fed, pack them off to school, and then get to work on time at 9 o'clock. Sometimes I get there at 9, sometimes I'm late, but I'm so frazzled by the time I get there. So I asked her for the name of her employer, and I rang her employer. And I said, have you ever thought this lady gets to work and she's frazzled, she's stressed, she's not productive for maybe another hour until her body calms down. Why don't you have a bit of flexibility and say she can start at 9:30? By the time she gets there at 9:30, she'll be so productive, you'll be quids ahead anyway. So often those sorts of things just start with a conversation. And that is the first approach I would take. Ultimately, depending on the severity, might mean that you might want to take them or recommend they go and see a doctor, or have they, if it's a student here, have you spoken to your parents about it? If some people don't want to speak to their parents, so maybe they'll confide in you. But that's why I say it's important to have a look at the Beyond Blue website, so you at least have some knowledge as you go about your life, not only for yourself, but also for your school colleagues as well. Who's next? Anyone else? Quiet mob down here on the peninsula. No? All right. Well, please enjoy your lives. Don't ever be afraid to reach out for help if you think you need it. Whether it be academically, be it sporting, but importantly with your health. It's not a crime to be ill. It's a crime not to get help. Thank you all very much indeed. Have a good day. And